if you are considering buying a 2470 specifically for Sony-E mount, you need to check out this video, because myself and Deon will be testing 3 options from big manufacturers here: the Sony 2470 GM2, the Tamron 2875 G2, and also the Sigma 2470 2.8 Art.
Now, back in 2022, we did a video pretty much exactly the same as this, where we compared, at that time, the Sony, the Sigma, and the Tamron kind of 24-70 2.8 equivalent lenses. Now, as Andre said, in the interim, both Sony and Sigma have updated their offerings. And the question then becomes, with the Tamron now being a slightly older generation lens, is it still a contender? Or are the Sony and the Sigma simply in a league of their own?
So for today's test, we came here to Deer Park, very close to Table Mountain. It's sort of right here in the background. And we've decided to take the 3 lenses and put it to one sensor. So we're shooting with one Sony a7 IV. That'll be for mostly the stills. And then Matt also has another a7 IV that he'll be doing the A-roll with. So throughout this video, you'll see we'll be jumping through the different lenses with the A-roll, and then of course for the photography, we'll sort of set up and show you which one is which.
To go into detail on these images, we're obviously going to have to go back to the studio, throw these images up onto a nice big screen, have a look at them, pixel peep, see what's really going on. But before we do that, I think it is important to just talk about the look, the feel, and the function of these lenses. Not necessarily the specs, because that's pretty self-explanatory, but just how they actually feel. And I'll kick it off with the Tamron over here. Now, the Tamron is currently, by quite some margin, the most affordable one of these lenses. And not to sound negative, but you can feel that. There is quite a gap from where the Tamron is to the Sigma or the Sony. The Tamron has a barrel and a body construction that feels a bit more plastic than what the other units do. Not to say that it's poor quality, like we know from experience that these are very well made, but they do currently, when you hold them side by side, they do lack that feel, that heft that the other units do.
Yeah, and I mean, the funny thing is the Sigma is actually the slightly heavier one of the group. So even though the Sony is sort of like the premium option, it's actually a very good balance of good performance, but not too heavy when you talk about the Sony. Just a side note, these 3 lenses are not stabilized as well. We're seeing stabilization improve in camera with these mirrorless bodies so much. So yeah, it might not be needed to have stabilization added on top of these lenses.
Yeah, I will second that. That Sony feels really solid, but the Sigma feels like if you drop it, it'll break anything that it lands on. Rocks, earth, anything. It'll absolutely just shatter. That thing is a tank of a lens, and it feels like it will last absolutely forever. The one thing that I will mention that I do find very cool on the Tamron lenses is that they have a little USB port. So that you can use to update the firmware on the lens. So as your bodies improve, as more features come out, you can update them to take advantage of those. So makes your lens a little bit more of an investment going forward. With the Sigma, you have to use their dock to update. And of course, with the native Sony, you can do that update on body, which is kind of ideal. But I feel like Tamron has a very, very nice solution for it here. My only concern about this is that it is open. And I think that will compromise the weather resistance of this lens, where the Sony and the Sigma both have full weather resistance. These things you can shoot in the rain, no problem. The Tamron, I'd be a little bit more hesitant to go as wet as on the Sony or the Sigma.
So, seeing that we've got the touch and feel out of the way, let's head back to the studio and check out these images. So we're finally in the studio and we've had a chance to look through these images and video and give you some feedback on these great 3 lens options.
Yeah, and spending some time looking at these images, I think one thing is abundantly clear, and I'll get it out of the way straight off the bat. there is no bad option here. There is options that are better, but also significantly more expensive, and there's options that are really good and a lot more affordable. And that's going to be my takeaway. So if you want to stop watching now, it's probably a good time. But if you want some more detail, let's run through some of these images. So the first image that we'll show is like a portrait, shot wide, you know, but if you punch in, you can see some clear differences between these images. And to no surprise really, I think, in terms of sharpness, the Sony is the sharpest.
Yeah, and I think that's going to probably be a big theme of this video. I mean, you are paying quite a lot more for those fancy Sony elements and technology that goes into the lens.
Yeah, indeed. I think where, it's difficult to say, but I think where the Sony does edge it a little bit for me is on the edges of the frame. I feel like the Sony retains a little bit more detail. And I know with the G Master 2 of the 24-70, they did do quite a push to get that edge sharpness in there, and I think that is quite evident. But in terms of a portrait general purpose lens, all three very, very suitable in this scenario here.
Yeah, I mean, and also to remember, the Sigma and the Sony is wider. It's 24mm, the Tamron is 28mm.
Also very true, yeah.
So if you do look at 24-70, I mean, you probably mostly will shoot at the 50 to 70mm range, which is going to be our next image, which is I think these were shot on all 70mm, if I'm not mistaken.
Looks about like it, yeah.
And also obviously at wide f2.8. And again, here you can see, even though we did focus on the eye, there's more detail in your face and beard with the Sony again.
Yes, the Sony definitely picks up the fine detail better, just the way that I look at it. You get better separation, especially where you look at like eyelashes and eyebrows and that kind of thing. The Sigma is a very close second for me. The Tamron, little bit softer, but it's negligible. It really, really is negligible. The other thing here, and I feel like in some other lenses, the gap's a little bit bigger, but the general bokeh for me, very pleasing on all of them. Excellent background separation. Whether you're looking at the Tamron, the Sigma, the Sony, like really, really solid, pleasing bokeh to my eye.
Very soft.
Yeah, if I had to give it to one, it's probably gonna go to the Sony. It's a little bit more creamy. To my eye. I know, terrible thing to say, but that's just kind of how it looks to me. Yeah, I think I'd give it to the Sony, but it's so close, man. It's so close.
So seeing that you mentioned the word bokeh, let's check out these out of focus balls in the background. And first up, we do need to mention, we're shooting with a Tamron, the sun was hitting the background and it did move a little bit. That's why there's a bit of a color shift in these images. But focusing on just the sort of shape of these out of focus balls in the background.
Yeah.
There's some differences, you know, and especially when you look at more accurate, I think the Sony again just looks a little bit more rounded, a little bit more accurate, especially in the corners.
Yeah, to me, the Sony's, like the spears are a little bit clearer, a little bit more defined, if I can put it like that. And it maintains the shape across the whole image. From corner to corner, you just get a little bit more pleasing, a little bit more even distribution. The Sigma is good, I will say that, but the easiest place to spot it is if you go top right hand corner. There's definitely some distortion happening there that you didn't see on the Sony. And I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what's causing it, but it is realistically just how the elements are designed, how they're made. You know, Sigma may be focusing more on that pinpoint center sharpness, and Sony giving you that little bit more edge to edge room there. Where it gets a little bit messy to my eye is with the Tamron. You get a lot of sort of overlapping, a lot of almost like bokeh ghosting, if I can put it like that. Especially top right corner, sort of like our focal point on it. Top right corner gets very, very messy. Still very pleasing, but just not quite where the other two is. And realistically, it's probably just because it's an older lens design. You know, the other two have moved on a little bit. But at the end of the day, if I was shooting that and I wasn't looking at it super critically, I'd still be very happy with that background separation, with the general circular notion in it. Yeah, I still think it's a very solid offering.
Next up, we shot this photo of a water bottle, trying to get the sun to hit the top of it, so you can get this sort of like chromatic aberration test just to see how that holds up. And I mean, if you zoom in on the cap where we focused, it's very close. You can see a little bit of sharpness difference again with the Sony.
Yeah.
But the chromatic aberration control on all three lenses is very good. And I actually thought that the Tamron would sort of fail in this, but it did very well.
Absolutely. I mean, they are virtually identical. You get that little spark flare where the sun hits, which is perfect. If you really punch in and you really look, there's a fine little purple line. It's there on all three lenses. So yeah, I mean, it's virtually identical. I cannot split them on chromatic aberration in this image. They are spot on.
Then the next shot is where we test sort of like coatings applied to the elements. That is where we'll see a lot of like lens flare or ghosting. And here is where you can definitely see there's quite a big difference. Even a little bit of loss in contrast, but there's quite a huge flare sitting there in the center of the screen or the side of the screen with the Tamron.
Yeah. All in all, I feel like the Tamron held its contrast pretty decently, but the flare that it picked up was quite dramatic. So these were taken like within seconds of each other, so there was no sun movement, anything like that. And the Sony and the Sigma both handle that flare significantly better than what the Tamron does. Yeah, I mean, it's just that is unfortunately just a fact. It's probably down to the coatings, could be shape of the elements, you know, various reasons for it. But yeah, unfortunately, that is a bit of a loss for the Tamron on that one. The Sigma and the Sony, though, rock solid.
I mean, these were obviously shot with no filters.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is something you can correct with a polarized filter if you are doing these kind of shots. But
yeah, 100%.
So obviously these were mostly photos that we did, but we also did shoot some video, or Matt shot some video, and he also did some tests with focus breathing. Overall, all three lenses performed very well in terms of autofocus. Again, like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, none of these are stabilized. So if you are shooting handheld, I mean, in-body stabilization or gimbal, but autofocus on video, really good.
Yeah, all of them rock solid. The only sort of slight aberration that we picked up was on the Tamron lens. There was one or two instances where it hunted a little bit. Could be potentially, you know, a little firmware fix needed, you know, maybe a little firmware correction between the body and the lens. But all in all, rock solid. Like really no issues with it, with the autofocus.
So for this video, we actually want you guys, the audience, to come up with a conclusion and drop it in the comments below, seeing that you guys saw all the photos and videos as we did. But without ending it off properly, we all know how Deon likes to narrate the ending of the video.
Yeah, I do like a good conclusion. But the only thing that I will say in this case is that all three lenses are really excellent given the price point that they come in at. And that's my shortest conclusion ever. Cheers, guys.